medieval art and architecture, what people go and build or create displays a lot about their culture. And if you're a visual learner, you'll like this lesson here. And you'll start picking up kind of when you see around town or see on TV or movies these different types of buildings and paintings. So starting off, we'll go and start with the earlier form of architecture, Romanesque, and then move on to the later part of architecture in the Middle Ages, Gothic. And then we'll talk about what the art looks like during the Middle Ages as well. Characteristics of the Romanesque style buildings, and I'll put all these on here and explain them briefly, but it's better if you actually just see them and then you'll be like, oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. The arches are going to tend to be rounded. The ceilings will be barrel vaults. So these buildings, what they look like, they look very sturdy, thick. If something is Romanesque, if it's esque, it looks like it's from the Roman era. Obviously, it's not the Roman era because we're talking about the Middle Ages, but it looks like it's from that time. So they're going to look kind of Roman-ish, is really kind of, in a modern sense, kind of a word that we would use. Thick walls. When you go inside the church, it's very like otherworldly, and you have to think about the context of the early Christian church has to worship in secret. So they're kind of familiar with that. It'll be dark. Inside, there'll be mosaics, frescoes. Mosaics, remember, are those paintings made out of tiles. Frescoes are painted directly onto wet plaster, and then it goes and dries. When you go and see a window, it's usually going to be small, cramped. You can kind of imagine this is the type of church you would go into and light a candle, and it would be reflecting off the walls, and there'd be some beautiful gold leaf stuff in there. Very different, as you'll see from the Gothic. The parts of the church you need to know. This is very common for even churches today to be organized or designed in this way. It is somewhat intentionally designed as a cross. So let me go through it here. When you walk into the church, you have to build anticipation at the time. And this includes the Gothic churches as well, are done in this style, but just good to know kind of the anatomy of a church. The narthex is like the entrance or the main lobby. The nave, right, navel means center, or aisle is the main aisle. They're going to go walk down the nave up to the front of the church. Then you have the transept. That's the part that crosses it, makes the cross the cross. The apse is the back part, this curved back part behind. I'll show you a picture. And the pier are all of these things that are holding up the church, providing architectural support. So here's the back part. It's kind of like the inside of a tennis ball or something if you're going to cut on the inside. Looking at the Cathedral of Lisbon, it almost looks fortress-like. So when you look at a Romanesque building, if it looks very sturdy, strong, thick walls, it's definitely Romanesque. Another one here, you can see the rounded arches. You see rounded arches here, as well as these piers, the small windows in the back. Barrel vault essentially looks like, vault means ceiling in this case, right? Looks like if you split a barrel down, right down the middle, half a barrel. You go to the beach because I see some piers and some rounded arches. Hardy har har. There's fresco painted directly onto the wall rather than onto canvas. Jesus rocking the peace sign right there. Next time you go to UCLA, it's actually in a Romanesque style, and you can see the sturdiness of the walls, rounded arches, smaller type windows. It's in that Roman style. Now Gothic, it gets more advanced because the buildings that they can make essentially are going to be able to get taller. So in contrast to kind of the sturdy, thick walls of a Romanesque building, Gothic are going to be slender. They're going to have pointed arches, so they're going to come to a point rather than a round when you look at those. They also have the flying buttresses in order to provide the support that they need. And in addition to that, they have stained glass windows. That's a huge feature of a Gothic style building. Gothic kind of looks a little bit creepier to most people. A big idea of that time is what's called the mysticism of light. And this is an idea that light has some mystic or godlike quality to it, and that God is light and evil or the devil is darkness. And if God is light, then you should let the light of God into the church, and the light of God should be seen through the stained glass, and that's where you get those amazing works of stained glass. The columns tend to be narrower. They also, instead of, in contrast to the ribbed vault, of the barrel vault, they have a ribbed vault, which I'll show you. And the point of a Gothic cathedral is forcing perspective on you. It makes the building even look taller than it is. And I mean, they actually can be fairly tall. But it's to make you feel small and make God look big and make you, frankly, a little bit scared to some extent, because that's kind of a medieval way of looking. It's kind of a fear-based gospel. In addition, they have sculpture, famously the gargoyles. The source, this is actually Abbot Sugar St. Denis Cathedral is considered the first Gothic church, and you see it's kind of a hybrid. It has some Romanesque qualities, but it also has some Gothic qualities as well. Here's Reims Cathedral in France, and you can see the beginning here of this beautiful stained glass. You can also see the pointed arches. Now here's the ribbed vault. In contrast to the barrel vault, very straight, narrow, you see a lot of like more ornamentation in these style of buildings. So these are the ribs up here, each of these, just like you have ribs, on the side of your body there. That's the kind of the way to think of it. That's why it's called a rib with a rib vault. And this picture kind of sums it up, the idea of the mysticism of light, that God's beauty can be shown through these like amazing stained glass. Vertical emphasis, making you go and look towards the sky. There's Notre Dame, famous building. Now you know it's a Gothic style building. There's Chartres Cathedral in France, another famous Gothic cathedral. Rose windows, you'll see this kind of rose window, a circular window. Tends to have a lot of symbolism because people can't read or write at the time. Usually you'll have somebody like Jesus or Mary in the center. It might have like the 12 tribes of Israel along the outside or the 12 apostles. And usually tells a story to some extent or has some form of famous saint, martyr. This one in this case is showing the last judgment, the heaven, sending people to heaven or hell. If you're going to build such a big building, you need to support it. And especially if a large portion of it's made out of glass, the building's frankly just not going to stand. So one thing that you tend to see on these Gothic buildings are called flying buttresses. And they're these things that stick out from the side of the building that provide extra support. Here are gargoyles. Gargoyles are very famous, kind of physical manifestations of evil. You'll see them sometimes as rain gutters. And the idea of kind of seeing the devil with the pitchfork and the horns, that really is a medieval idea. You don't see that really in the Bible. You see it come in the Middle Ages, where this idea of this kind of demon, this like demonic thing with the horns and the pitchfork and all that stuff, the way they look right here, really comes into fruition in the Middle Ages. And that kind of reflects a lot of their worldview regarding evil. Now, there's kind of some different interpretations on the gargoyle, what the purpose was. Some people said it showed how evil the outside world was to kind of scare people into going and becoming Christians. There's some other theories out there as well, maybe saying this is how evil looks. But the point here is that the gargoyles were very medieval way. Some people also said that the gargoyles scared away evil. I don't know how that works, but that's kind of belief as well, that they could scare away evil spirits because they look evil themselves. But very, very just unique and frankly kind of creepy looking. Okay, so we looked at some building. What's the point? What's the point of the Gothic cathedral? The Gothic cathedral, the cathedral is the head of the town. You are not a city unless you're a cathedral. And always the tallest building in the city is going to be the cathedral because it's a very Christian society. If you're a city, it's going to take a long time to complete. If you're a big donor, you probably will have some mention maybe in the cathedral. And we have to be a little more cynical. If you build a cool enough or a grand enough cathedral, you're going to start bringing people into the cathedral. Think about Canterbury Cathedral, where people start going on pilgrimages to go visit the tomb of Thomas Becket. So it provides pride to the city, and it provides a bit of money as well. Moving on to the art. The art serves a similar purpose and really reflects a similar kind of worldview as the medieval buildings. You'll see different types of art. You'll see frescoes, panel paintings, which are on wood, manuscript illumination, which we talked about before, which is the fancy writing in the Bible, and prayers, things along those lines. Stained glass. A big thing to think about here is they serve a narrative feature. So if you're relatively educated and know most of the main Bible stories, if you just look at these paintings, you can fairly quickly, in most circumstances, figure out what it's doing. You have to think about the society at the time. If most people are illiterate, you have to be able to go and tell the stories of the Bible because they're not going to read it themselves. So these will be featured in churches. They're very biblical. The themes will be, Old Testament, New Testament, a saint, a martyr, something along those lines. In order to go and avoid being too good in a sense, or making it go towards idol worship, you'll see that they're almost somewhat purposely unrealistic in the way they're portrayed. The background is unrealistic. There's lack of emotion on people's faces. They don't look superhuman. You have unhuman humans, as a bit of a paradox there. And there's kind of a lack of detail. The main artist, He's actually he's kind of a later medieval, early Renaissance, is Giotto, and you need to know him just as kind of the main artist, and he's actually one that really starts to transform the kind of medieval towards the Renaissance style art, which looks very different. Here's St. Francis. If you see these halos, that's very medieval, that kind of sets it off, kind of flat, 2D, lack of emotion, etc. This is the story you can see here of Jesus turning the water into wine at the wedding. You can tell, if somebody's a saint or whatnot because they had the halos, and then see if you can guess here in the painting who these people are. And last but not least, this picture pretty much sums it up. The setting is just a gold background. You see Mary there with a Jesus who looks more like a man baby than a real baby, holding the English flag, and surrounded by a bunch of angels. So it's very unrealistic, very Christian kind of in its theme. So we went over the kind of Gothic cathedral, the Gothic and medieval paintings, and also the Romanesque. All three very much reflect the Christian worldview and the medieval worldview as well.